You're a line manager, Ben, not a scientist. Stay in your lane or find a new one. Those were the last words Diane Ashworth, CEO of Larkspur Foods, said to Ben Calloway before security walked him out of the building he'd worked in for 11 years. Ben had just told her, calmly and with the data to prove it, that the new preservative formula, cutting costs across all 6 Larkspur plants, would shorten shelf life by half and cause spoilage complaints within 90 days. He was right. It took 81. By then, Ben didn't work there anymore. Don't look away, because 3 years later, Diane Ashworth would walk into a small bakery on a quiet corner 2 hours from her office, looking for the one supplier who could save the biggest contract of her career. She had no idea whose name was on the lease. Ben Calloway had spent 11 years as a food scientist and plant manager at Larkspur Foods, a mid-sized commercial baking company that supplied packaged bread and pastries to grocery chains across 4 states. He wasn't flashy. He didn't chase promotions. He cared about one thing with a stubbornness that eventually cost him everything. The product had to be right before it left the building. When private equity took a controlling stake in Larkspur 2 years before Ben's firing, the new leadership brought in Diane Ashworth, a finance executive with no background in food production and a mandate to raise margins fast. Diane's team identified a cheaper preservative blend that would cut ingredient costs by 12% across all product lines. Ben ran the shelf life tests himself twice and brought the results to Diane's office personally. "This formula fails at day 41 instead of day 90, he told her. "We'll have spoilage complaints and recalls within 3 months. Diane looked at the 12% savings projected on her screen and looked at Ben's data for exactly 4 seconds. "Run it anyway," she said. "Corporate wants the number by end of quarter." Ben refused to sign the production approval. 2 weeks later, he was terminated for failure to support company cost initiatives, a phrase vague enough to survive a wrongful termination review and precise enough to end his career at Larkspur permanently. He was 42 years old, with a mortgage, a used truck with 140,000 miles on it, and a 9-year-old daughter named Josie who had lost her mother to cancer 3 years earlier and had exactly one parent left to build a life around. The severance ran out in 4 months. The job search ran longer than that. Food science management jobs in his region were scarce, and Larkspur, quietly, made sure any reference check that came through landed on someone loyal to Diane's office, rather than someone who remembered why Ben had actually left. By month 7, Ben had sold the truck. By month 9, he'd fallen 2 payments behind on the house. By month 11, the bank took it. Josie never once asked why they were moving into a rental, half the size of their old house. She helped him pack instead, wrapping her mother's china in newspaper with the careful seriousness of a 9-year-old who understood without being told that some things mattered more than being asked to understand. "We'll be okay," Ben told her the night they moved. "I know," Josie said. "You always figure it out. You just haven't figured this one out yet." Ben found it 3 weeks later, a shuttered corner bakery called Nell's. Closed for 2 years after the original owner passed away with no family interested in running it. The listing price was $1, contingent on the buyer covering $11,000 in back taxes and bringing the building up to code within 90 days. No one had made an offer in 8 months. Ben walked through it with a flashlight on a Saturday morning. The same careful, unhurried attention he'd once given a failing preservative formula. The ovens were old but intact commercial deck ovens built to last decades, not the cheaper convection units modern bakeries used. The walk-in cooler compressor had seized, but the insulation was sound. The bones of the place were honest, even if the surface was ruined. He used the last of his severance and a small loan his sister co-signed to cover the back taxes. He named it without changing the sign. Nell's Bakery, a decision the town noticed and appreciated more than he expected. A quiet signal that he wasn't erasing what had been there before him. For the first year, Ben ran the bakery mostly alone, with Josie doing homework at a small table near the register after school, the same way she'd once done homework in a house that no longer belonged to them. He didn't have investors. He didn't have a marketing budget. What he had was 11 years of food science training and a stubborn belief that bread made correctly without shortcuts would eventually find the people who noticed the difference. The turn came from a sourdough starter Ben rebuilt from a culture Nell's original owner had left behind in a forgotten jar in the walk-in. Still faintly alive after 2 years of neglect, Ben nursed it back over 6 weeks, applying the same patient, methodical process he'd once used to model shelf life curves, feeding ratios, temperature logs, hydration percentages tracked on a legal pad, the same way he used to track spoilage data. The bread that came out of it was better than anything the town had tasted from a local bakery in years. Word moved the way it does in small towns slowly, then all at once. By year 2, Nell's had a line out the door most mornings. By year 3, Ben had hired 6 employees and expanded into wholesale accounts with 2 regional grocery co-ops, who valued a product made without the shortcuts larger suppliers increasingly relied on. Josie, 12 now, worked the register on weekends and knew most customers by name. She'd grown up twice in 5 years, once in a house that got taken away, and once in a bakery that got built back, brick, by a father who never once explained to her what failure was supposed to feel like. Because from where she stood, she'd never once seen him fail at anything that mattered. Larkspur Foods did not do well without Ben. The cost-cutting preservative formula failed exactly the way Ben had predicted spoilage complaints. Then a regional recall, then a lawsuit from a grocery chain that dropped Larkspur as a supplier entirely. Diane Ashworth survived that crisis by publicly blaming supply chain quality control, never once acknowledging the engineer who'd warned her by name in a memo, still sitting somewhere in Larkspur's legal file. But the damage compounded. 2 more cost-cutting decisions in the years that followed eroded product quality further. And Larkspur lost 3 more major accounts to smaller, quality-focused competitors, the same shift in the market that had quietly lifted bakeries like Ben's. By the time Diane was 5 years into her tenure, Larkspur's largest remaining contract, supplying bread to a 340-location cafe chain called Fernwood Kitchens, was under serious review after 2 consecutive quarters of customer complaints about staleness and inconsistent quality. Diane knew what losing Fernwood would mean. It was 60% of Larkspur's remaining revenue. She needed a supplier who could deliver both scale and quality within 90 days. Or the company her board had installed her to save would be the company she oversaw into liquidation. Her team found Nell's Bakery through an unglamorous channel, a regional co-op buyer mentioned almost in passing that the best small batch bread quality in the state came from some little bakery 2 hours out, run by a guy who used to do something technical before this. Diane didn't recognize the description. She hadn't thought about Ben Calloway in years. Diane arrived at Nell's Bakery on a Tuesday morning in April. Dressed for a supplier meeting she expected to have with a small-town baker, who'd be flattered by the attention of a company Larkspur's size. She had a proposal ready, a wholesale supply contract large enough to save Fernwood, structured generously enough, she assumed, that no small operation would turn it down. She stood at the counter for nearly 10 seconds before Ben, wiping flour from his hands behind the register, looked up and recognized her. Diane didn't recognize him at all, not immediately. It had been 3 years, and the man in front of her wore an apron instead of a Larkspur ID badge, and looked, if anything, more at ease than she remembered him being in any meeting they'd ever had. "I'm looking for the owner," she said. "I have a supply proposal I'd like to discuss." "You're looking at him," Ben said. Diane studied his face for another moment, and then it landed, the same calm, unhurried expression that had once told her a preservative formula would fail exactly the way it did. Her posture changed almost imperceptibly. "Ben Calloway," she said. "Diane," he said. "Coffee's on the house. The proposal isn't." She sat down anyway. Over the next 20 minutes, she laid out what Larkspur needed: volume, timeline, the Fernwood account's requirements, without once mentioning the memo, the firing, or the 81 days it had taken her cost-cutting decision to fail exactly as Ben had predicted it would. Ben let her finish. Then he asked one question. "Are you still running the same shortcut playbook that got us here?" Diane was quiet for a long moment. "No," she said. "I learned that lesson." Slowly and expensively, but I learned it. Then I'll consider a contract, Ben said. Not because Larkspur needs saving, because Fernwood's customers deserve bread that doesn't go stale in 3 days. And if my kitchen can deliver that at your volume without cutting a single thing I believe in, I'm not going to let old business get in the way of good bread. Diane looked around the bakery, the deck ovens older than her own career. The sourdough starter log taped inside the kitchen doorway. A photo of a younger Josie stirring a mixing bowl twice her size pinned to a corkboard by the register. You built all this after I fired you, she said. It wasn't quite a question. I built all this because you fired me, Ben said. I'm not going to pretend that's a story I'm grateful for. But I stopped needing you to be sorry a long time ago. What I need now is a contract that doesn't ask me to become the thing that got you into this mess. Larkspur Foods signed a 3-year supply agreement with Nell's Bakery 2 weeks later, not a full account transfer, but a partnership structured around Nell's scaling into a second production facility. Funded jointly, with quality control standards written into the contract that Ben, not Larkspur's board, had final authority to enforce. Diane never got her apology. Said out loud, not in so many words. But 6 months into the partnership, a regional business journal ran a short profile on the deal, closing with a quote Diane gave without prompting. The best decision I've made as CEO was admitting the person I once dismissed knew more about doing this correctly than I did. I wish it hadn't taken a lawsuit and a bakery 2 hours away to learn that. Nell's Bakery, the sign still unchanged. Still reading the name of a woman who'd never met Ben Calloway, but whose ovens he'd rebuilt with his own hands now supplies bread to 340 Fernwood locations across 4 states, alongside the same morning line of regulars who remembered when it was just Ben, Josie, and a jar of sourdough starter someone else had almost thrown away. Josie, 15, now still works weekends at the register, though she started talking about food science programs, the way she used to talk about anything. Her father did, like it was simply the obvious, correct thing to be curious about. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't gotten fired? She asked him once, restocking the pastry case on a slow Sunday afternoon. Ben thought about it. I'd probably still be running someone else's shortcut playbook, he said. I like this version better. It's slower. It's harder some days, but it's mine. And it's honest. And that turned out to matter more than I understood back when I still had the truck and the mortgage and the badge. Josie closed the pastry case and looked out at the morning line forming outside the door. The same door that had been locked for 2 years before her father found it. Nell would have liked you, she said. I think so too, Ben said, and went back to the ovens. The way he had every morning for 6 years, doing the work the only way he'd ever known how to do it correctly, without shortcuts for people who noticed the difference.